Hello learners, how are you? I am Dr. Gaurav Rao. I am Associate Professor in Department of Education, Mahatma Jyotiba Phule Ruhelkhand University, Bareilly. Today I am with you to talk about some issues and challenges in science education in India. Before we start, let me tell you that this is a topic that is basically for not only teachers but also for some administrators and policy makers. So, the problems and issues which I will be sharing with you all is addressing the problems of teachers and for policy makers as well. National Curriculum Framework basically talks about three main fundamental issues in science education in India is that we are still far from achieving the goal of equity that is prescribed in our constitution. What does that mean? We have a textbook of science that we use it in the class. We go into the class, we teach and we find out the results. In doing so, we never address on the differences of the students in class in their learning. Who, when, where and how much could have earned, learned and faced science and have learned more. This needs to be corrected. Another issue that is very prominent and is identified by NSAF is that our science education develops the competence, but not the inventiveness and creativity. What does that mean? We teach them science, we tell them to solve numericals, we tell them to identify objects, we tell them to classify them, we tell them to infer from them. But how this observation, this classification, this inference is to be used by them in society, we do not motivate them to do that. And when we do not do that, they do not think on that line that they have to use the science for inventing new things and come out with the existing problems. And many a times students do come out with new things, but this newness is not to the level where it can be said that it is a creative thing. We as a science teacher need to address this aspect wherein we put in our students not only to study science, learn science, give out science, but also to invent science and bring out some of the objects that are creative and useful for the society and life as well. One more fundamental issue that is to be addressed by us is the overpowering examination system. Most of our teachers in schools teach students to let him pass the examination, let him crack some entrance examination, some talent search examinations. But is the examination important for science, or science is important for satisfaction, imagination, inventiveness and innovation? Examination shouldn't be to score, but to know the competency and skill attainment. Let us see one by one the problems that we face as teachers in our schools and as a student too. First and the foremost, in no case we would accept that the lack of teachers is the biggest problem. Lack of teachers here I mean there are no teachers, means there are only 5 to 6 teachers in the school, those who teach all subjects to all the students. Does it specify the need of science to the students? I think you all will agree not. Okay, if there are teachers, are they qualified? Okay, what do I mean when they are qualified? Qualified means having a training degree doesn't mean that they are going to be a good teachers. They are qualified or not is the second thing that you have to see that we don't see. And the last one is, if they are qualified, are they competent enough to generate the inquisitiveness, enthusiasm and quench the thirst of a science student? I don't think so. Teachers does teaching and teaching because they consider it to be a job. It is because which when they are made to make the timetable, they don't have that much of time to prepare for experimentations in laboratory. They are given 5 to 6 periods a day out of 8. Can you imagine? If he is to teach for 6 periods a day, where he gets the time to set up experiments, read for new experiments and design for new learning situations. One other problem we need to address and talk to is, teacher, if given 3 periods a day, say one in class 6th, one in class 7th and one in class 8th, he either is given continuously all 3 or 2 in a consecutive time period or all in one consecutive time period. If he has breaks in between, he could be able to read, devise and design the instruction for which he is going to teach in class. The policymakers needs to see this. The principals and the timetable in charges in the school needs to see this, that when they design the classrooms timetable, they need to give some time to the science teacher to have break, designed for experiments in one class to the other. Another requirement that we see nowadays is that this problem of teacher of setting of the experiment could be satiated by the presence of laboratory assistant. If the laboratory assistants are there in schools, they can take out the instruments and keep it ready for the teacher, and the teacher will come and in no time will set up the experiment. But we see, if there are no teachers in the school, how come the laboratory assistants are there? Hence, we need to have one laboratory assistant per lab, say biology lab assistant, physics lab assistant, science lab assistant or all the curriculum lab assistants. Let us talk about some of the content specific problems we see in the science education in India. One, we need to understand the gap between the science subjects. A gap between the science subjects, here I mean that the physics, the biology, the chemistry, the mathematics, the environmental sciences, the geography, they are so separated that the content of one subject is never taken up by the teacher of the other subject dealing the other paper. The biology teacher will only concentrate, compartmentalize and restrict himself or herself in biology content only. Hence, this gap of the subjects keeps on increasing. There are some concepts which you would agree that are not at all present in some of the publications, and if they are positioned at the end of the chapters, and when the last chapters are to be taught, the session is about to get over, and those chapters are touched very lightly and is brushed over, and sometimes by teachers it is said that you read this chapter, we will discuss it if you have some problems. I still remember when I was a student, my science teacher told me 1 to 2 chapters to read by ourselves and come and talk to her if we have some other problems. This is a very common practice. To have a solution to it, I must say that such topics can be given as a project to the students since inception of the course after a brief introduction. If you had given that topic with some introduction, with the starting of the session, be the end or in between or by the end of the chapter in the course, the student must be having a basic understanding, and you can take up those understandings and teach them better. One very common problems which we teachers say, accept and see in the schools, that is the instrumental problems, the instruments problem, that is the insufficient physical conditions of school. Let me share you. I did an experimentations and research wherein I studied the presence and absence of science laboratories in intermediate schools. You would be surprised to hear that there were around 60% schools wherein the laboratory was either not present, or if was present, was not functional. If the laboratories are present, there is lack of equipments. Means if biology lab is to be there, the dissection tray is to be there. The physics lab need to have the physical balance. If it is there, you can do some experiments. If it is for the sake of laboratory, there aren't any equipments, you can't do any experimentations, and definitely it is going to hamper the science education. There is some example where we have expensive equipments. I still remember when I was in class 10th, my biology teacher never allowed us to touch the microscope. She used to say only see into the eyepiece and just observe, don't touch. We at that time felt that that microscope is very costly, and if we touch it, it will get broken into pieces. Yes, out of surprise and inquisitiveness, many of us must have had resoluted the slides and we broke the slide and the cover slips. But that should not hamper our teachers to not let the student learn more. Let not the student feel that the equipments are expensive and you or he cannot touch it. Apart from being expensive, there are some equipments which are sophisticated and they are not allowed to touch by the common peoples, only teacher uses it, like microscopes fitted with computers and the digital photographs camera. There are sometimes when there is a fear to touch the instrument as well, even if they are present in the lab. I still remember cutting, sledging and many more practices were not allowed because of the fear to touch the instruments. Okay, suppose there is a class of 40 and you have one microscope. How the microscope observation will be done? Definitely, the less number of instruments itself is a big problem in science education in India. And imagine if there are 10 microscopes and still they are old, means they are not in a condition to get the light emitted properly and the students are not able to observe the instruments clearly. This is not going to work. And even there is another problem that the equipment is there, it is new, but it is out of order, means any part of it is not there, hence that instrument is not working, and because of which many institutions and schools cannot conduct experimentations because of such issues. Let us see some of the problems while science teaching. One big problem which I have seen is that children are interested to see the equipments, work upon the equipments, but they are not interested to see how the equipments are made and how are they working. Suppose if I am talking to you, I have a camera in front of me, I have my students all around, they would love to see what is being done and is being spoken by me and how the camera is working. But how is this camera constructed? What is the principle behind it? They are not interested into it. We as a teacher, to develop the science education in India, would work upon it and should work upon it. All the instruments that are there in the labs, you need to know to tell to your students that this is the equipment, these are the parts, and this is how you are going to use it. This actually happens because the enough time is not allotted in the timetable. I go into the class, I ask the students to open the book and ask them to read. Because I could not get the time to read the chapter by myself, I am not able to put some questions in front of the child, and hence I am to depend upon the book and talk accordingly. The problem gets worsened up when the science after upper primary level is differentiated into the physical science and the biological sciences, and furthermore in secondary level wherein you have the physics, chemistry and biology. A common problem of not using the scientific terms in place of common language is also observed. This, let me tell you very frankly, dear teachers, happens because if the teacher himself is not in a habit to use the scientific terms, but he uses that in common language, the children take it for granted and use the common language to teach. Okay, if you say at times that the students are not able to comprehend, tell them with the common language and then also tell them with the scientific term. Tell them to remember both so that they can learn more and use it as a folk wisdom too. Let us see some of the common problems that happens in the classroom. As we took the first issue that the science education in India could not reach to the equity. This means that there are some students in the classroom which are not as bright as some. There is some academic backwardness in some of our students, due to which they are not able to comprehend subjects like science or mathematics, because they are more dependent upon logic and reasoning. And as the time progresses and there is academic backwardness in the child, he develops the phobia for science, phobia of fear. Reasons can be many. It can be like personal, like he could not score marks in science, hence it becomes his mind thought that he is not good at science, and by teachers and by schools too. You all will agree, the teachers sometimes give an expression, this is science, you cannot teach science without taking care, science is a very difficult subject. The moment teacher says that in the class, this means that he himself accepts and proposes in front of the child that science is a difficult subject. In doing so, the child becomes over attentive, and even if some of the concepts are bit difficult to understand, that becomes many a times difficult for him to understand. It is also observed that the parents also say that read science and mathematics properly, they are very difficult subject, and hence the phobia of science increases. In school also there are periods of science and mathematics which are kept together, due to which the students cannot concentrate over these two subjects and hence develops phobia, because both these subjects are drill based, practice based subjects, and hence the students get more work to cover up and hence they develop the phobia. This is actually leading to the lack of confidence and the lack of willingness to approach to the science. This is found that with the phobia in the science, the child approaches to every topic with non-willingness to study and read. He himself feels that he is not going to cope up because it is a difficult subject. Being a teacher, and being a learner as well till now, there is paucity of resources and fundings for the teachers and to the schools, due to which the resources cannot be generated. Can you imagine with 500 rupees in a primary classrooms a science teaching can be done? How come the teaching learning materials can be developed with that little amount of money, until and unless the teacher has his own initiation of using the improvised apparatus in the classrooms? Apart from that, there is another problem, that is a focus on grades rather than learning. You most of the time in science and maths let the child feel to score more and achieve more. This psychological pressure of achieving more develops phobia and develops a problem in science education in India. There are some of the psychological problems that we need to see, that is the non-interesting image of science, and actually the non-interesting image is the poor image that is developed by the peoples all around. Oh, the science is very difficult, it is very difficult to understand, there are so many experimentations, ooh, what is this diagram all about? This images actually develops a non-interest, and hence the science education hampers. It is actually perceived to be difficult, not only because of the saying of the teachers as I explained, but also because of the parents at the home who all the time pressurizes the child to feel that science and mathematics are difficult subject. Another problem basically with the science education is this, that the student is neither given a chance to go into the hands-on experiences or experimentations and activities by himself, but there is no adequate time in doing it, because money and technical resources affects a lot. As I discussed that there are no teachers or less trained teachers or competent teachers, there is also non-availability of learning teachers. Frankly speaking, many of our teachers are not learners. Learners means they themselves do not try to, want to read new concepts, share new concepts and teach the old concepts into the new ways, and hence the teacher is not able to establish the relevance of science to the student's life. How some of the issues with teachers have affected the science education in India, I would like to share that also. There are inadequate policies to attract science teachers for compensation or for their professional development, to attract and prepare and retain high quality teachers. Teachers, if go for some programs, they either have to go in summer vacations or winter vacations. At times the salaries are also deducted if they do that for personal growth, and hence we do not have the best teachers. Actually, what I have observed is true learning and active teachers are not participating into the science and technology programs of science education, due to which what happens is this, that the true workers, the innovative teachers are not coming into the mainstreaming, and hence the science education is lagging. The insufficient in-service training of science teachers is in the transition state, and the new programs are still to be developed. In government sectors, in-service programs are there, but for private schools, teachers, in-service programs are being tried out by the government, but yet on a larger scale it is not. It is to be understood that when the compartmentalization of the subjects have taken, the teachers have been isolated within the subjects and across the departments, it is very difficult for science to develop. As I explained before, a biology teacher restricts himself or herself in teaching biology. A physics teacher does not go to talk about the biology. The chemistry teacher does not talk about biology. Hence, a holistic understanding of interrelationships of principles of physics, chemistry and biology does not get into the psychology of the child, which is the today's need. You might confront some reactions of a student when you ask a question of biology. He says, I have taken mathematics in 12th, I have not taken biology. What I feel is this, that this compartmentalization has led to the lack of common understandings and folk wisdoms deterioration in the last few years, which actually was not the sign of Indian science education. We had a understanding of all the subjects equally, which actually led the society to a new science education policy. Some infrastructural and instructional problems I would like to share. There are huge number of students in some of the classes, and there are some classes where there are no infrastructure. There is orientation that is to be required towards how to use the huge number of students in class. I am showing you two pictures here. If you see, on the left we have a classroom where the petty requirements of chairs and tables are not there. The books are not there with the child, only one or two students have the book and all of them are peeping inside that particular book. The blackboard is there in front of them, the walls are not there in the classrooms and classes going on. On the other side, there is blackboard, there is a good classroom, but the number of students in the class is more. Can you imagine individualized instruction? In this class you can see there is no passage of movement of the teacher in the class. If it isn't there, how come the teacher can talk, ask and see what a child at the back sitting is doing? Is he getting what he is teaching or not? It is basically shifting the student from passive learning to the teacher's traditional learning. Teachers teach in the class, open the textbooks, write on the boards and go away. And in doing so, they take the period as an ideal time to teach. In 30 minutes or 35 minutes, which I am saying is also more, because they have continuous classes and the teacher has to rush from one class to the other. It takes around 5 minutes from one class to the other to move if it is at the two different floors. The links between the lesson taught on the earlier class to the present class is broken, because there is no flexibility of periods. The teacher is not given two periods together if they want to. This actually leaves the child thirsty, and in the next class may be possible the child had read the chapter on his own or has no interest now left, and hence it affects the science education in India a lot. Let us see some of the solutions for improvement of science education. We are doing some efforts to develop the links between science and other subjects. As in our training programs, we talk about how science is related with languages, how science is related with environment, how science is related with geography, how science is related with its own distributaries and sister subjects like biology, physics and chemistry, astronomy and astrology later. Research is needed to establish clear links between the curriculum goals and the assessment methods used in science education. Until and unless we are not sure of the goals of a science education in India in a particular class, and how are these goals going to be assessed by the different methods, we cannot say that science education is true. And in doing so, assessment tools are to be developed and they are to be valid and reliable, so that if they are used, as and when they are used, they can be used either for formative assessment or summative assessment in science education. We need to have research based efforts to increase the use of out of school activity in learning of science. Why not take students out of the class, teach them with the trees, learn the rhymes with the trees, show them the water bodies. Why we stick it to the primary section only to take to the picnics? There is a need of action research based classroom problem solving and solution which needs to be conducted at the national platforms and shared it also, so that we and you can use it as and when required with possible improvements. I hope the issues and challenges in science education in India is clear to you. I know there are many individual problems as well, but still let us recap some problems we discussed. The three fundamental issues that we discussed was the goal of equity is not yet reached by the science education in India. We develop the competence, but we do not develop the inventiveness and creativity. We still have overemphasis on examination system. We talked about the lack of teachers, the competent teachers. We talked about the lack of time the teacher doesn't get to prepare for experimentations. We talked about the absence or lack of laboratory assistants. We talked about the content specific problems where we talked about the gap between the science subjects. We also talked about some of the contents that are not there in some of the publications, and if they are there, they are at the end of the chapters of the other section. We talked about the instrumental problems where we talked about that we don't have sufficient physical conditions in the schools. If we have equipments, they are either expensive or they are very sophisticated, and if they are in both these, they are out of order. We talked about some of the problems while we teach science, that is, we do not have equipments which are working, and we talked about how students are not interested in understanding how the instruments are made and working. This helps to make them understand that where they have to do the improvements. The problems is more when we have the division of science in its sister subjects. We also talked about how the scientific terms are not being used in science education. We talked about some of the common problems in classroom wherein the academic backward student is not treated differently and is not given more science to learn. We talked about the phobias that are there in the students. We also talked about the lack of willingness that develops due to these phobias, and we talked about the abstraction of ideas that are there in the students. We talked about some of the psychological problems wherein we told that these teachers and parents develop this non-interesting or poor image of the science. We also talked that the hands-on experience are lacking in science subjects. I suggested of some of the solutions to the problems, that was the efforts are to be given to link between the science and the other subjects. There is a requirement for the research to be done to link the curriculum goals with the assessment methods. We also talked about some of the action research that are to be done at the classroom problems, so that they can be shared at the national platforms and can be used by us. Problems are many, but it is our thought that how we handle those problems. We are teachers, we have to think about it, because problems keep on coming. That does not mean that we will get stopped. We have to teach and improve the science education in India. With these words, thank you so much.